Hello, hello. This is the My Artifact episode number 4081. Today's date is May 31, 2026. It's been almost like a night at 9:50 p.m. All right, let's just jump into the question. Let's go. All right, the question is, how will you fix audio gap after reduction? Okay. All right. First of all, what exactly is this question, and why am I asking this question to myself? I wanted to build a application called My Artifact. What is exactly is this application? When you wrote the diary every single day, you cannot able to be write the diary the way that you wanted to. The reason is that your writing speed is actually much more slower than your thought process. Why does writing speed is kind of like a much more slower? Because if you wanted to write the diary, you need a pen, you need a paper, you need a convenience, and even after all those things, you cannot able to be write the diary because it really requires so much amount of your effort to print your thoughts. So I thought that instead of writing a diary, what if we could record a diary, like a audio record a diary? This audio record a diary I called Artifact. The stuff that you are kind of like listening right now, this is My Artifact. My Artifact episode number 4081. I am doing this thing for past 11 years. I am doing this thing every single day. Writing a diary and is a self-reflection process, as well as recording a diary is also a self-reflection process. Recording Artifact is also a self-reflection process. Because of this self-reflection process, I am doing this thing for past 11 years. It add so much amount of value in myself. I connect with myself. I understand kind of like some the stuff around me. I don't know, the person that I became today, the person that I will become tomorrow, it is all because of Artifact. The amount of value that I get from Artifact, I wanted to share this value to the people, so that people should supposed to be get this value. How do I supposed to be share this value? By building an application. My application is somewhat something like a YouTube platform. In YouTube platform, you actually kind of like upload your video, other people kind of like sees your video. Same thing, you kind of like record your artifact, other people kind of like listen your artifact. There is only one catch, is that people will not gonna know your name. Your real name is always hidden. Like my real name is Saurabh Bauthare, but my artifact handle name would be Prozac 1943 or something else. This would be kind of like somebody making sure that my real name will not gonna be kind of like something reveal anywhere. Okay, so this is what my application. Before I wanted to build this application, I wanted to know all the possible consequences, specifically worse possible consequences that might gonna happen. Okay, so I went to ChatGPT and I tell my idea, tell everything. I also kind of like tell him that he suggests me hundreds of worst possible consequences in question. So ChatGPT kind of like suggests me hundreds of question regarding about my application, and this is one of those question. Now this question, it kind of like says that how do I supposed to be fix the audio gaps. Okay, yeah. Now regarding about this question, audio gaps. Okay, what's exactly audio gaps? Okay, so when people will kind of like record their artifact, they might gonna mention their name. Okay, yeah. So basically is this thing. Okay, let me tell you the process so that you might gonna understand. Okay. So basically, a particular person wanted to kind of like record the artifact. He went into my application. There is a record button. He pressed that record button, and basically there is a kind of like a warning screen actually appear. That warning screen says, "Do not mention your name, anything at all." at the bottom there is a countdown actually happening, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 4. Okay, yeah. And then after that it open up understood. You have to click on that button, then recording started. Okay, yeah. Recording started, and at the top of the screen there is a kind of like a question. You have to read the question, give the answer. Okay, yeah, kind of like that. Okay, and when you are kind of like a talk about the kind of like a deep into your thoughts, example is this thing, a question is actually asked that ki, how you feel when you first time you had a kiss with someone else. Now basically it's a very deep thoughts. You are kind of like a talking about how things actually happening and things and that, and it's kind of like a really good to explain this thing, because like a like a like a when you have first time you had a kiss with somebody, this kind of like a moment you might not forget easily. So you are trying to explain everything. Okay, now basically what exactly happened at the spur of the moment, you might gonna mention something. You didn't mention your name or you didn't mention other people name, but still you mention the your college name, you still mention kind of like a something and that and that. Okay, now basically this actually happening. Now after that particular person record almost like a 30-45 minute of recording. Okay, yeah, then that particular person he has a two option. He have to be review his artifact or save into the draft. Okay, yeah. Now basically assessing what's exactly review or save. Okay, first of all is that that particular person will kind of like a save his artifact to the draft. Okay, so that he will kind of like a review later. Okay, review is very much essential. He kind of like a put into the save into the draft. Okay, then kind of like a, so what exactly happened that key, then basically when he will get kind of like a free time, he put on that headphone and kind of like a click on that review button. Okay, yeah, in the review button he has to be listen his entire artifact. Yeah, that is very much essential, by the way. He have to listen almost like a 95% of entire artifact. Okay, now basically is this thing, when the particular person record almost like a 30-minute 45-minute of artifact, does that particular person kind of like a listen almost like a 45-minute of artifact? No, it's not really that key you should supposed to be seek, but you should supposed to be kind of like a simply listen your artifact in maybe kind of like a 1.5 or 2x speed or 2.5x speed. Okay, yeah, this would be kind of like a simply much more kind of like a simply that key much more faster way to kind of like a review your artifact. Okay, yeah. And basically when you kind of like a reviewing, there is at the 12-minute 33 second you kind of like a mention your college name and things and that. Okay, so basically what you have to do, you select that particular text or certain particular that thing. Okay, and kind of like a trim that particular segment. Okay, yeah, that particular segment, which would be kind of like a really good. Okay, even after you kind of like a mention some sort of name, you kind of like a trim it down. That is what kind of like a review is actually for, because when you kind of like a review, you kind of like simply fixing your own mistake. Okay, because instead of kind of like a using AI to kind of like a block all those kind of like a noun and things and that, AI will not gonna kind of like a do it properly. Why? Because of that key, probably AI will kind of like a block the such a text which has a name like your name or maybe your college name. But what if you kind of like a mention something that doesn't really have a name? Like basically it's saying you kind of like a mention that ki we went to eat samosa at M Cafe. Okay, yeah. So M Cafe is not even relevant to your story. It's just kind of like a simply things. But still AI consider that ki M Cafe is a noun, so trim that particular segment, which is not even necessary. Or maybe a particular person might gonna mention that ki I was kind of like inspired by Tony Stark. Now Tony Stark is a kind of like a friction name. Okay, yeah. It doesn't reveal that much kind of like a privacy, but still AI will kind of like a trim that particular name too, and that is, yeah, kind of like a detach the stuff. So instead of kind of like a simply AI will kind of like a simply fix your mistake, let you can kind of like a fix your mistake. let you kind of like that particular user will kind of like a review, and when that review, that particular segment might gonna mention something, trimmed out that particular segment. And after that trimmed out, okay, after everything is actually final, it's not really that kind of like a Premiere Pro kind of like editing. No, it's not. It's just kind of like a very simple, okay, yeah, select the trim. And it's not really that a particular person kind of like a mention every single time the name and things and that. No, just kind of like somebody maybe one or two time at the spur of the moment. Okay, so he would listen, he trim that particular segment, and after he's satisfied, then he kind of like a publish the artifact. Okay, so basically the question is actually about that key when you kind of like a trim, what is actually happen with that blank space. There is no blank space. There is a kind of like a two clips are cut and kind of like a join. So there is no blank space actually happening. Okay, so it might be considered as an abrupt cut, right? Well, yeah, that is really good. It's considered as a kind of like a really abrupt cut. Like basically my name is, and then yeah, like basically is this thing that key abrupt cut is actually kind of like a utilize in a video, okay, in a specifically video audio, but it's an audio based platform. When you kind of like add the abrupt cut, people not even kind of like somebody understand and things and that it might gonna consider, okay, it's a kind of like a things. But important thing is that now when the user is a kind of like a trimming his stuff that he wanted to trim, then everything kind of like a became very close. Like a user will kind of like a decide that which part should supposed to be put and which part should supposed to be deleted, which would be kind of like a really good. Okay, so yeah, this is kind of like a things. And basically when he review after almost like a 95%, then that particular person hit the publish, and this is what actually happening. So the kind of like a somebody, the question is actually about that key, how will you fix the audio gap by after reduction. So there is no audio gaps. Okay, yeah, like there is no audio gap. So this is kind of like a thing. Now another thing is that now what if kind of like some user will kind of like do it very intensely. What is exactly intensely means like that ki, okay, so when we talk, like when I'm kind of like talking very normally, I do take a pause. Okay, I do take a pause and things and that. Now basically when the person is kind of like reviewing the artifact, he might kind of like trim down a blank spaces that doesn't really kind of like mention anything at all, but remove that blank spaces. It might kind of like somebody user shouldn't supposed to do that thing. Like basically is this thing that na ki, like do not do that. Like basically if you are kind of like some user who thinks that he kind of like remove that kind of like some, it doesn't really necessary. Okay, I just trimmed out a kind of like a particular segment that you might think that he probably might gonna privacy will compromise, then remove that thing. Another question arises that what if that user doesn't really trim that particular segment. Okay, yeah, that particular user purposefully kind of like mention the name and purposefully not trimmed out that particular name. So in that situation, what will gonna happen? That user wanted to compromise his privacy. Okay, yeah. So in that situation, what will gonna happen? In that situation, when the user will kind of like compromise, he wanted to compromise, then probably when the artifact will kind of like publish, after the publish, AI will kind of like trim down that particular segment. Automatically select the noun, trim out that particular segment. Even if there is kind of like some stuff, things that it just trim out that particular segment. Okay. Now basically is this thing that na ki, dude, this might be kind of like a very crazy thing happened. Like example is this thing. I might gonna mention that ki I was actually inspired by Tony Stark. Now Tony Stark is a kind of like a name that a fiction character. It does not reveal my kind of like a identity, right? But after I publish, then AI will kind of like trimmed out that Tony Stark. Then it doesn't really make sense at all. Then why am I kind of like editing, right? Well, this is not actually happened. Okay, like basically what is actually happened that key when like okay, sorry about that. Okay, so when your artifact is kind of like a edited means kind of like a trim out the particular segment and things and that application will gonna know that ki you kind of like a properly kind of like a edited. Right now I don't really know how do I supposed to do this thing if the user are purposefully kind of like a compromise his identity and things and that. But first of all, if the user is a kind of like a simply purposefully compromise his identity, compromise the privacy, he kind of like a mention his name purposefully. So in that situation, what will gonna happen? Is there something wrong happen to your platform? Well, it's not really wrong thing happened to my platform, but the problem is that na ki if one person do it this thing, then other person do the same thing too, and people might gonna utilize my platform for wrong purposes. Okay, what is exactly that wrong purposes? Example. Okay, so first of all is that ki why does people will kind of like a mention the name? Let's understand that fact and then we kind of like a figure it out. Okay, so my application is not a kind of like a simply social media platform that you could kind of like a simply follow or subscribe or things and that. Like I was kind of like a thinking about that ki probably having multiple followers and things, but I realized that no, like my application shouldn't supposed to be have kind of like a follow button and how many followers that they have or how many subscribers that they have. No, nothing really at all. Okay, so basically this thing, every artifact is like a every person artifact is every artifact actually judge if the artifact is kind of like a really good, it kind of like a recommend to the more and more people. Okay, yeah, and people kind of like something just give the kind of like a something that ki like and kind of like a put the comment. They don't they cannot able to be kind of like a something that ki they cannot able to be kind of like a uh, give the follow and things and that. Okay, now because of this thing, what will gonna happen that ki if your artifact is really good, you are talking something really good, then the higher chances that ki your artifact will kind of like a recommend to the higher and more people. Okay, yeah. So more and more people means what? Like basically is this thing in YouTube platform, you will kind of like a, if you are kind of like a make a video, probably you will kind of like a get 500 views or 1000 views. If your video is kind of like a really good, then you might gonna get kind of like a some 1000 views or maybe 2000 views or yeah. But it at the beginning, YouTube is not kind of like a letting you give that many views. Why? Because of that, YouTube wanted to understand. YouTube is kind of like a simply making sure that you will kind of like a get the proper audience, and then after that, your kind of like a simply content will kind of like a suggest to your audience, and slowly you will kind of like a improve your kind of like a audience base by subscriber base and things and that. Okay, yeah. Instagram is also kind of like a same thing will gonna happen. Okay, yeah. Artifact is not. Okay, yeah. Artifact is not following that. Like if your artifact is really good, really great, you are actually talking about really good, then your artifact will kind of like a recommend to the more. It does not depend upon this is your first video, first artifact or second artifact or things and that. Okay, yeah. It does not really have any audience. Okay. Artifact doesn't really have any audience. Artifact just a kind of like a something is this thing. If your artifact is really good, it recommend to the more and more. So the higher chances that ki if you're talking really good, then probably you might kind of like a getting almost like a million listeners. Okay, yeah, in maybe kind of like a very less amount of time and things and that. So what will gonna happen that ki if you realize that ki if your artifact is kind of like a getting almost like a million listen or million views, okay, yeah, then people will kind of like utilize for this promotion, like a promote themselves, like they will kind of like a promote that ki their name or things or that and that. Okay, yeah. Now basically I was actually thinking that ki by AI I will kind of like a trimmed out the particular name and things and that. But if kind of like a, if I allow like if when I kind of like decided that let the user will kind of like review his own artifact and edit his own artifact and things and that, then I don't really required to AI kind of like something trim out that particular segment. Okay, yeah. Because if the user is kind of like doing it that, then AI kind of like doing it that doesn't really make sense at all, right? So what exactly happened when the user will kind of like simply mention the name and things and that, and he purposefully kind of like simply mention the name, okay, then what will gonna happen that the artifact will not gonna kind of like recommend to the more and more people. Why? Because of that, there is a Adam will kind of like decide your artifact is really good or not. Even if your artifact is really good, but you purposefully mention your name and things and that, then it is not really good. But why are you kind of like focus on so much thing about that ki you shouldn't supposed to mention the name? Why? Okay, like basically is this thing na ki yes, at some time I wanted that ki user will kind of like mention the name and things and that, but okay, I have to think about every possible scenario that might gonna happen. Okay, if I'm allow user to kind of like mention the name and things and that, then people will kind of like mention their name, that how they are kind of like really good and things and that. But if they are kind of like mentioning their name, then what's wrong in that thing? No, there is no wrong in that thing, but the problem is that na ki, okay, let's just say the criticism actually happened very easily. Like example is this thing that na ki I kind of like criticizing the government regarding about the taking their name of government and things and that. Okay, so basically the person who is kind of like criticizing government, okay, good, great, you have to be kind of like criticize the government. Even if the government is kind of like wrong, you have to criticize. That is good, that is great. But the problem is that na ki it's a kind of like a thing that na ki defamation happen very too much. Okay, what's the defamation? Defamation means like that na ki you are kind of like a defame somebody purposefully. Okay, yeah. Like let's just say a kind of like some Apple. Apple is a kind of like a company who makes a kind of like a some product which is kind of like a really good iPhone, things and that. Okay, yeah. Now basically is this thing, some particular people will kind of like decided that ki like a basically just defame the Apple company. Okay, and how are you supposed to defame? Kind of like simply make a video on YouTube platform or make a things and that. Now in the YouTube, audience base kind of like decide everything, but in artifact doesn't really have audience base. So in that situation, if your artifact is kind of like a went viral, you will get kind of like a million views and million things and that. So in that situation, okay, in that situation, it is very easy to defame the kind of like a somebody company or people or things and that when you mention the name. Okay, so this is kind of like a thing. So probably this is kind of like a stuff that I have to be understand. Like first of all, I was thinking that na ki, like I don't know, I'm kind of like somebody improvising myself regarding about that ki should I supposed to be kind of like a let the user kind of like a mention the name or things and that. Like at the beginning I thought that ki okay, let the people who kind of like a mention the name, okay, let them do it, but people will kind of like utilize for wrong purposes. Okay, or maybe I have to be kind of like add the kind of like a follow feature or subscribe feature, then probably build your audience and things and that. But when it will kind of like a build the audience, then what will gonna happen that ki higher chances that kind of like a privacy will kind of like a compromise, because your audience will try to always gonna know you and things and that. I don't know at the moment. Okay, yeah, probably is this thing that na ki I'm not really sure how do I supposed to do this thing. Okay, if I'm kind of like letting user to kind of like express their name and things and that, I'm not really sure that what will gonna happen. Like this kind of like is my question. I'm not really sure about this thing, but most of the people will kind of like say that ki artifact is a kind of like a very detailed personal thing. They will not gonna mention the name. Okay, so probably I don't know at the moment what exactly my answer would be that. Okay, yeah. But one thing for sure at the beginning, it will kind of like some privacy. I will kind of like mention, yeah. But if the user is kind of like a purposefully kind of like a mention the name, then yeah, I don't know. I don't have any solution for that. Okay, yeah. Sometimes I kind of like think that ki, okay, let them, people will kind of like let them kind of like simply share their name and things and that. But sometimes I realize that ki, no, it's not. I don't know. Okay, yeah. Right now I'm kind of like simply just understanding the every possible scenario that might gonna happen and how do I supposed to fix it. Okay, right now I'm kind of like building this application. So yeah, whatever. I have to be end right now. Okay, this is it, and thank you.